G'day cocktail lovers. There is a World Gin Day if you didn't know, and depending who you believe, it's either the second Saturday in June or the 12th of June. Either way, as I make this, I'm between the two, so splitting the difference. But gin production being such a big deal in Australia lately, a couple of local distilleries, well to be fair, probably all the local distilleries had special events for Saturday's World Gin Day to try and get people in and have a few drinks. I went to two of them. I don't quite have the endurance to go to more than that, and I am going to use those along with a few others to highlight just the diversity of gin. In terms of talking about the differences between gins, I don't think it's particularly useful to go to these classifications like a dry or a London dry or an Old Tom, because those are all these rules that legally define in different jurisdictions what a gin is. But in terms of you or I, as people tasting gin, the flavour profiles I think are much more useful. And there's a lot of variation across these, but you can group the flavour profiles into about half a dozen things to say, you know, here's a style that is like this. The first obvious one are the juniper forward gins. To be gin, the spirit has to be based around juniper, but the juniper is more prominent in some gins and less in others. The juniper forward gins are the ones that really have that pine sort of flavour in them, which gin lovers love. A lot of people say that's what puts them off gin, but that's really only one subset of gin. The juniper forward ones also tend to be on the drier side, and if a gin is called a dry gin, it's probably going to have a more noticeable juniper profile. When I say drier, I mean less sweet. Another common note you'll get for flavour profiles in gin is floral, as in flowers, because while juniper is the central botanical in gin, it's wide open after that, and different botanicals that have floral notes are quite commonly used, so you will get some gins that are described as floral. Another common flavour profile is citrus forward. A lot of gins will include the peel of citruses in the mix when they're putting together their gin, and some will do more than others, so there is an actual really noticeable citrus aroma and citrus flavour in the gins, and that lends itself particularly well to a cocktail, for instance, that may have other citrus elements in it. Spice is something you will increasingly see in modern gins. That's regarded as a very modern thing to do, to put more noticeable spice flavours in, whether it's as simple as peppers or something more exotic. It is a little more common with modern gins to see something that's got a real spice flavour both in the aroma and the flavour. At the other end of the flavour spectrum are sweeter gins, and notably the sloe style gins. That's S-L-O-E. That's the berry that comes from a shrub tree called the blackthorn, and this was a division of gin that was recognised in England, I think in the early 20th century. It tends to be a lower alcohol content than gin, like as low as 25%, and have the colour of the fruit and be much sweeter. Now, as the years have progressed, distillers have gotten much more creative. They use different fruits and there'll be different strengths. I have a couple of Australian fruity style gins that are right up at the 38–40% ABV. You could always bring in a whole bunch of other profiles too, but you get the idea. There's a bit of diversity in gin. And here's another fun thing distillers are increasingly doing. This is a barrel-aged gin. This is actually made by a whiskey distiller here in Melbourne, Starward. They call it their black lime gin. So this is a citrus forward gin. The dominant note is from a fruit called black lime. But then they have aged it. They didn't just finish it, they aged it for 2 years in one of their ex-whiskey barrels. So that gives it some very interesting notes, and it actually, you know, could stand in for Genever almost, in that halfway zone between gin and whiskey. Gin is comparatively quick to distill and bottle, much quicker than, say, whiskey, which is usually at least 2 or 3 years old, depending which part of the world it's made in. You don't have to age gin, you just go through the distilling process, which means it's often something distilleries do first when they set up. So Australia alone, I think, has hundreds of gin distilleries, and I only buy Australian gins. In my collection, I get my whiskies are mostly Australian, my rums maybe half Australian, brandies some Australian, liqueurs probably less than half Australian, but a decent set of Australian liqueurs in there. Gins, I only buy Australian because they're so good. I just can't, well, apart from cost, I guess. Some of the big mass-produced international brands are cheaper, but in terms of taste and diversity, I just can't imagine getting anything else. Which is not to say good gins aren't made anywhere else in the world. I just like supporting local. This is another fun example of the creativity. This is from the Never Never distillery in South Australia. This is beeswax and olive gin. That's what they've used as the primary flavours along with juniper in here. And of course, the olive saline notes, it says, hey, really good for a martini, which it absolutely is, trust me. Speaking of salinity, that's something that's actually becoming more common. I didn't actually say that as a flavour group, but certainly in Australia it's becoming more common, maybe because a lot of us live on the coast here and you get that sea salt tang and you can bring it in with some of the plants that grow along the shoreline. This is one of the gins I picked up on a Gin Day event. This is from a distillery called Patient Wolf. They call it Pink Lake Gin. The description is inspired by the landscape and flavours of Australian coastal and outback Pink Lakes, filtered through Mount Zero Pink Lake salt to create a savoury, salty flavour profile. Mount Zero are a very well-known boutique olive producer here in Australia, and they work with First Nations people in that area to actually harvest the pink salt from these saline lakes, and Patient Wolf went into partnership with them and made this pink gin. Most pink gins, when you see them, they're probably artificially coloured and they're very sweet. This is natural colour that comes from the pink salt, and it's got a very saline profile. Their distiller loves his martinis, and he created this as his ultimate martini gin. And honestly, I have to agree, having had a martini with it on the weekend. But mind you, counterintuitively, I had a sour made with this, and it's the best sour I've had in a long time. This is a very different one I picked up on the weekend from a distiller called Craft & Co, Craft & Company. You see that colour, that bright yellow? It's not a urine sample, it's mango. This was a limited edition they called Summer Gin Project. It uses mango and native Australian botanicals in there. And so this is arguably the slow style. It's a fruity flavour, it's sweet, it's 38%, so it's no lightweight. And I got this, I guess, really for contrast. I got the one gin that had a saline profile, and this one has a quite sweet, fruity profile. The sweeter gins don't have to be really colourful like that. This is from the Threefold Distillery in South Australia. Steve the Bartender, well-known Australian YouTuber, is one of the partners at Threefold. This is one of their experimental gins. It's a coconut gin, and I have played with this, doing some tropical style cocktails, substituting this in ones that asked for white rum, and it makes for a really interesting variation. So there's a lot of creativity out there. I should also mention Navy Strength while we're talking about the types of gin. That's not so much a flavour profile as a type, as in it's really strong. Your average gin is in the 40% ABV area. Navy Strength tends to be over 50%, often around the 57% alcohol by volume. So it's pretty serious, and it's, yeah, that whole Navy history with the gin is where that comes in. This one's kind of fun from Fossey's distillery because this one actually has a citrus forward profile with navel oranges. They call it their Navel Strength Gin as opposed to Navy Strength Gin. Fun little pun, I love wordplay. Having had that little talk through about the gins, I'm going to make gimlets with 4 different gins here. I'm going to probably make half-size gimlets because then I'll be left to drink them. I'm going to use the most simple of gimlet recipes, 2 parts gin, 1 part lime juice, half a part of sugar syrup. And I'm going to make 4 of them with different styles. I'm going to do the saline gin, the fruity gin, the Navy Strength gin, and ooh, lucky last, I will do this citrus forward gin. Like I said, making gimlets the easy way, 2 parts gin, follow that up with 1 part of lime juice, and finally half a part of sugar syrup. Then I have to shake each of these up and then pour them into a little cup each. I was going to blind taste these, but they're going to be different colours anyway, so I will just do the taste knowing what they are, even though that might colour my reactions. Well, let's go. I'm going to start with the pink gin, and it's a slightly pink gimlet that has the saline profile. The saline is still coming through, but it actually works really well with the lime. You know, kind of like that margarita thing with a salted rim. That worked quite well. Now for the fruity mango gin. Big surprise, this one is sweeter. So if you have a sweet tooth, this might be the type of gin you'd want to make a gimlet with. This is the citrus forward gin called Sunrise Lime from Archie Rose. That's hitting a sweet spot between the sweet gin and the saline forward one. This is almost a Goldilocks and the Three Bears thing. It's going to depend on your tastes, but there's a sweet and there's the slightly salty one, and this one is really playing the citrus right down the middle. Finally, for the brave souls, a Navy strength gin. This really tames that high proof gin by just putting in the lime and sugar. And it does actually bring forward the navel orange flavours. I have tried that straight just to taste it, and it's pretty hot. So basically, for me, I was tasting alcohol, ethanol burn, and putting it in a gimlet really sets it off nicely. I'd thoroughly recommend, if you're scared of Navy strength gins, put one in a gimlet and see how that goes. Well, that was my World Gin Day look across a few Australian gins. And like I said, I'm very parochial and going for the Australians. If you're outside of Australia, there are some extremely good quality Australian gins available around the world, and I'd recommend if you get the chance to try them. But wherever you are, there's bound to be local distillers doing interesting things. Look, I'm not going to shame anyone who just goes for one of the big international mass-produced brands. If that's one you like, stick with it. But I'd really encourage you to explore a bit, find an independent distiller that's doing interesting things, because it will show you that gin is just not one thing. There's a whole spectrum to be explored.